My colleague Asieh Namdar spoke to political analyst and writer Adam Barron. He's a visiting fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations, and he said the talks are only the first step in what is likely to be a long and complicated process.
I think it's important for us to keep our optimism guarded. On the one hand, it is certainly a bit of an achievement just to have these two factions sitting at the same table. Let's face it, it's been 2 years since there's been anything resembling meaningful peace talks in this form. That being said, it's not the kind of thing where you're going to see, a peace deal signed in a week. What we're talking about is slow, steady potential progress towards building confidence, towards building trust between these two parties that can eventually shift things more towards the political track. There's still massive divides on a lot of key issues. There's the question of what to do over the port of Hodeidah. The Houthis have signaled some willingness to hand it over to the UN, but the Yemeni government basically is demanding that they should either be allowed to take it over by force or to tell the Houthis to effectively leave. The Yemeni government is also stating that the Houthis need to be disarmed. So there's a number of key sticking points, and I think these are things that are going to keep coming up throughout the process.
Let me ask you about the U.S. position. Last month, the Trump administration put an end to refueling Saudi planes in this conflict, but it did not stop selling U.S. arms to Saudi Arabia. And critics say the U.S. here is partly to blame for this humanitarian disaster that has unfolded in Yemen. What would you say to that?
I mean, the United States is undeniably a key partner of Saudi Arabia, and American military aid is helping the Saudis in launching the continuing military operations in Yemen. In addition to that, I think even though you have had noise from certain elements of the Trump administration, including Secretary of State Pompeo and Secretary of Defense Mattis, regarding a ceasefire, it's important to remember that Saudi Arabia really is a cornerstone of Trump's policy in the Middle East. So it's hard to see that changing. It's really going to be an open question of whether you're going to see Trump even engage in the most mild of pressure against Saudi Arabia to kind of push this war to an end.
The UN has called this the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Millions at the risk of disease and starvation, 22 million in need of some sort of protection and aid. The country's infrastructure absolutely devastated, and yet it seems the world, at least up until now, was not paying a whole lot of attention. Some might even argue had turned a blind eye to this massive conflict. Adam, why is that?
People have been predicting this humanitarian crisis for some time. And as many of us, I remember saying it in interviews like this years ago, there will come a time when we look and say, why was nobody paying attention to Yemen? To be honest, Yemen just doesn't have that kind of visibility in the American consciousness, in the Western consciousness, like a lot of other conflicts have. It doesn't send, for example, refugees to Europe like, for example, the Syrians or the Libyans do. It's not a place, like Cairo or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's really had a strong history of an impact on the United States.
And what comes after this conference in Sweden? What's next in this process?
I mean, the question of what next is really the key question when we're looking at things. Even if there is tentative agreement, if there's not follow-up, then it's quite easy to see this, the whole process effectively collapsing into more conflict. So what one would hope, and what I've been told the envoy is aiming to do, is to kind of follow this up with more meetings, follow-up meetings, continuing this, not just making this a sheer week-long meeting, but really building it into a wider peace process. And this is the kind of thing that could well, not immediately, but in the medium term, end up paving the way for a peace settlement.